My name is Eleanor Vance. I'm 32 years old, and I'm a landscape architect, specializing in restoring historical gardens. I see patterns in the land, the way roots intertwine beneath the surface, and sometimes, the way old foundations can crumble despite a fresh coat of paint. I learned that lesson the hard way, not from a neglected rose garden, but from the family I almost married into. The first time I truly felt their disdain was at the engagement dinner my fiancé, Julian, insisted we have at his parents' country club. His mother, Evelyn, a woman whose pearls seemed permanently fused to her neck, raised her crystal champagne flute. Her eyes, however, were fixed on me with a look that wasn't exactly celebratory. To Julian and Eleanor, she began, her voice dripping with a practiced sweetness that didn't quite reach her eyes. We welcome Eleanor into our family, of course. She brings a certain freshness to our established heritage. A valuable perspective from outside our usual circles. The subtext hung in the air like a heavy curtain. I was the outsider, the unpolished gem, the one from beneath them. My smile felt brittle, my hand tightening imperceptibly around Julian's under the table. I just nodded, a quiet defiance burning inside me, knowing that this wasn't just a clumsy toast. It was a declaration. And what I didn't understand yet was that my own father, a man who built things with his hands and valued honesty above all else, would eventually unearth the very roots of their so-called heritage, exposing something they had meticulously buried for decades. To understand why I stayed, why I even considered marrying into that family, you need to know Julian. He was different from his parents. Or so I thought. When we met 5 years ago, at a city park redesign project where I was consulting and he was handling legal aspects for a developer, he was charming, intelligent, and genuinely interested in my work. He didn't care that my father owned a small, reputable custom woodworking business, not a sprawling real estate empire like his. He admired my passion for bringing forgotten beauty back to life, for understanding the history embedded in the soil. He said he found my groundedness refreshing, a stark contrast to the superficiality he grew up with. His parents, Evelyn and Richard Thorne, were another matter entirely. From our first formal introduction, they were polite but distant, always subtly probing. "Your father's business, Eleanor, is it local?" Evelyn had asked, her gaze sweeping over my simple but elegant dress. "Yes, he's built custom furniture and cabinetry in Cedar Creek for 30 years, I replied, proud of his craftsmanship. Richard, a man whose tailored suits seemed to be a second skin, chimed in, "Ah, a craftsman. Excellent, excellent. A noble pursuit." Though, of course, Julian will be managing the Thorne Group's portfolio, a rather different scale of endeavor. They lived in a sprawling estate outside the city, their lives curated down to the last detail, from their antique furniture to their carefully selected charity affiliations. They often spoke of our family name carrying weight and their contributions to the community, a phrase that became a recurring, subtle jab. Julian, to his credit, would often try to smooth things over. "Mom, Dad, Eleanor's work is incredible. She's helping restore the historic gardens at the old Fairmont estate." But their dismissive smiles would remain, a silent judgment hanging in the air. Julian's younger sister, Charlotte, was worse. She'd make comments about my practical shoes or my sensible car, always with a sweet, patronizing tone. "Oh, Eleanor, you really should let Julian treat you to something a little more, you know, Thorne," she'd once said, gesturing vaguely at my perfectly fine sedan. I just smiled, reminding myself that Julian loved me, and that was what truly mattered. The pressure escalated after Julian proposed. Suddenly, every family gathering became an audit of my suitability. Evelyn started hinting about prenuptial agreements, not directly to me, but to Julian, loud enough for me to overhear. "Julian, darling, we simply must protect the family assets. You know, for the legacy. It's not about trust, it's about responsibility." Julian would get defensive, assuring me it was just his mother being overly cautious, but the words chipped away at my confidence. I saw the way Richard would watch me during dinner, a calculating look in his eyes, as if assessing my financial worth rather than my character. One afternoon, Evelyn invited me for tea at their estate. It wasn't tea, it was an interrogation. She laid out a stack of glossy brochures for a prestigious charity gala they were chairing. "We're hoping you'll be able to contribute, Eleanor," she said, pushing a donation form towards me. "We expect all family members to show their commitment. Of course, we understand your current situation. Perhaps a smaller contribution. To start?" She made it sound like I was asking for charity, not being asked to donate. I politely explained that while I supported their cause, my current income was focused on saving for our future home, not extravagant galas. Her smile tightened. "Yes, well, some families have a head start, don't they? A foundation already laid." She then proceeded to show me photographs of Julian's ex-girlfriends, all from families with names as old and heavy as their mahogany furniture, subtly implying I was a downgrade. That detail mattered later. I went home that day feeling utterly defeated. I called my father, Frank Vance, a man with calloused hands and an even keel. I didn't go into all the details, but I told him I felt like I was constantly being judged, that I wasn't good enough for them. He listened patiently, then said, "Ellie, you're good enough for anyone. Maybe they're not good enough for you. Sometimes people who puff themselves up the highest have the most to hide." His words were a quiet comfort, but they also planted a seed of suspicion. My father was a man who believed in knowing the full story, in understanding the grain of the wood before you carved it. Julian, seeing my distress, finally confronted his parents. He told me they'd agreed to be more welcoming, to stop with the veiled insults. For a few weeks, things seemed to improve. The comments were less frequent, the smiles a little more genuine. But the underlying current of superiority remained. It was like a persistent weed, always finding a way to sprout through the cracks. They would still occasionally drop a remark about our family name carrying weight or the importance of legacy, always with a pointed glance my way, as if to remind me I had no such thing. The true turning point came when Julian and I started looking at wedding venues. I suggested a beautiful, historic arboretum, perfect for my love of nature and history. Evelyn, however, insisted on the grand ballroom of the country club, the same one where the engagement dinner had been held. "It's tradition, Eleanor. Our family has celebrated every significant event there for 3 generations. It's where our legacy is honored." When I gently pushed back, suggesting we could start our own traditions, Richard finally dropped the polite facade. "Eleanor, let's be frank. This isn't just about a venue. It's about fitting in. It's about maintaining appearances. Your background, while perfectly respectable, isn't exactly aligned with ours. We simply cannot have our son marry a woman who doesn't understand the importance of our standing in the community." He said it with a chilling calmness, his eyes devoid of warmth. Julian, for the first time, seemed truly uncomfortable, but he didn't outright defend me. He just mumbled something about finding a compromise. That was when I recognized what was truly happening. They weren't just snobs, they were actively trying to diminish me, to make me feel small, so I would gratefully accept their generosity and fall in line. They wanted me to know my place. And Julian, caught between his love for me and his ingrained loyalty to his family, was failing to protect me. I went to my father again, this time laying everything bare. The comments, the charity gala demand, Richard's blunt declaration. I told him about the legacy they constantly invoked. My father listened, his jaw tight. "Legacy, huh," he repeated, a thoughtful glint in his eyes. "Sometimes, Ellie, the loudest claims to a legacy are trying to drown out a very different story." He then asked me about the specific family connections Evelyn had mentioned, the names of the founding fathers she often referenced. He also asked about the Thorne group's origins, which Julian had always presented as a story of shrewd business acumen and honest growth. My father, a man who loved local history and spent his evenings poring over old books and newspaper archives, started doing some digging. He didn't have any secret access, he simply knew where to look for public records, old property deeds, and microfilmed newspapers at the county library. He started with the town where the Thornes had first established themselves, a small, once thriving mill town called Blackwood, about an hour's drive away. He visited the local historical society, talked to some of the older residents, and patiently pieced together a narrative. What he found was not a story of honest growth, but of ruthless exploitation. The original Thorne fortune, the one that formed the foundation of their legacy, wasn't built on savvy investments. It was built on a series of predatory land acquisitions in Blackwood in the early 1900s. The Thornes had bought up vast tracts of land from desperate farmers and mill workers during a severe economic downturn, often at pennies on the dollar, using legal loopholes and aggressive tactics to force sales. They then leveraged this land to establish a textile mill that paid abysmal wages and was notorious for unsafe working conditions, leading to several preventable deaths that were quietly settled out of court. The local newspaper archives detailed strikes, protests, and a deep-seated resentment against the Thorne family, who were seen as absentee landlords and exploitative industrialists, not pillars of the community. One article even mentioned a specific instance where a large parcel of land, now part of the Thorne Group's most valuable holdings, was acquired through a legal maneuver that bordered on outright fraud, dispossessing an entire family who had lived there for generations. The original family had been too poor and powerless to fight back. My father compiled all of this into a meticulously documented report, complete with copies of old newspaper clippings, property records, and even a few oral histories he'd recorded from elderly Blackwood residents. He didn't want to ruin Julian's life, but he wanted the Thornes to stop their hypocrisy. He believed in fairness. The decisive action came a few weeks before the wedding. My father didn't approach Evelyn and Richard directly. Instead, he discreetly sent his compiled research, a thick binder titled The True Roots of the Thorne Legacy, to the president of the prestigious Cedar Creek Historical Preservation Society. Evelyn Thorne was currently the society's vice president, and Richard was a major donor, often giving speeches about preserving local history. The report was accompanied by a polite, anonymous note suggesting that the society might find this alternative history of a prominent local family of interest, especially given their commitment to historical accuracy. The effect was immediate and seismic. Within days, the whispers started. The Historical Preservation Society, known for its integrity, began a quiet internal review. The president, a meticulous historian, was reportedly appalled by the findings. The Thornes, who had always cultivated an image of unimpeachable respectability, found themselves under scrutiny. The first indication of the fallout was a frantic call from Julian. He sounded panicked. "Eleanor, my parents are furious. The Historical Society is asking questions about Blackwood, about some old land deals. They're saying things about our family that aren't true." I feigned ignorance, asking what he meant. He explained that Evelyn had been called into a meeting, and Richard was fielding calls from concerned board members. "Someone sent them a dossier, Eleanor. A complete fabrication, attacking our family's good name. My mother is threatening to sue." I met Julian for coffee. He looked haggard. "My parents are convinced it's someone trying to sabotage them," he said, running a hand through his hair. "They keep saying our family name carries weight, and someone's trying to drag it through the mud." I looked at him, really looked at him. "Julian," I said, my voice quiet, "what if it's not a fabrication? What if it's the truth?" He stared at me, then his phone buzzed. It was Evelyn. He answered, and I heard her shrill voice even from across the table. "Julian. That dossier, it's been leaked to the local paper. The Cedar Creek Sentinel is running a story about the unveiling of a hidden past next week. Our legacy, Julian, our legacy is being destroyed." Julian hung up, his face pale. "The Sentinel? How could this happen?" I took a sip of my coffee. "Maybe," I said, "someone finally decided that the truth about their legacy needed to be exposed." I then told him everything my father had found, the real story of Blackwood, the exploited workers, the fraudulent land deals. I watched his face crumple as the weight of his family's carefully constructed image shattered. The article in the Cedar Creek Sentinel was a sensation. It wasn't a sensationalist exposé, but a deeply researched historical piece, citing public records and interviews, detailing the origins of the Thorne family fortune. It didn't call them criminals, but it laid bare the ethically questionable, often brutal, methods used to build their initial wealth, directly contradicting the narrative of honest industry they had carefully crafted. The paper even included a sidebar about the original family dispossessed of their land, a stark contrast to the Thornes' opulent estate. The aftermath was swift. Evelyn and Richard Thorne resigned from the Historical Preservation Society, citing personal reasons. Their names were quietly removed from several charity boards, and invitations to exclusive social events became conspicuously absent. Their family name now carried a different kind of weight, the weight of a shameful past, publicly acknowledged. The phrase they had used so often, "our family name carries weight," now felt like a heavy stone. Julian was devastated. He struggled to reconcile the parents he knew with the ruthless figures depicted in the historical accounts. He wanted me to tell my father to retract it, to issue a statement. I refused. My father didn't fabricate anything, Julian. He just brought the truth to light. The truth they worked so hard to bury, while looking down on everyone else. Our wedding was called off. Julian couldn't bring himself to stand up to his parents, even after their past was exposed. He was too deeply entrenched in their world, too afraid of losing the status that came with the Thorne name, even if that name was now tarnished. I couldn't marry into a family that had not only rejected me as beneath them but whose own foundation was built on such a dark history, and whose son couldn't see past it. I moved on. My business thrived. I found peace in restoring genuine beauty, in tending to roots that were honest and strong. My father, of course, never boasted about what he did. He just said, "Sometimes, Eleanor, you have to dig deep to find out what's really beneath the surface, even in the prettiest garden." And he was right. I learned that a meticulously polished silver frame, the kind the Thornes displayed so prominently in their living room, could hide a very ugly picture.